I haven't slept properly in 4 months. Every time I close my eyes, she's there, standing at the foot of my bed with that same knowing smile. But here's the thing that's been eating away at me. I saw her at the grocery store last Tuesday, and she waved at me like we were old friends. Subconscious, processing the changes in my life. He prescribed some mild sleeping pills and told me to create a better bedtime routine. But the dreams got more vivid, more detailed. I started noticing things about her face. A small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her teeth were slightly crooked on one side, the sound of her breathing even though she never spoke. I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. In the dreams, she'd move closer to the bed each night. The first week, she stood by the door. The second week, she was in the middle of the room. By the third week, she was right beside my bed, close enough that I could see the texture of her skin and the way her dress moved when she breathed. I tried everything. I changed my diet, stopped drinking coffee after noon, bought blackout curtains, even rearranged the bedroom furniture. Nothing worked. Every single night, there she was. What made it worse was how real it felt. In most dreams, there's something fuzzy or disconnected about the experience. But these dreams felt more real than my waking hours. I could feel the weight of her presence, the slight drop in temperature when she appeared, the way my heartbeat would quicken when I saw her standing there. After a month of this, I was exhausted. I was making mistakes at work, falling asleep during meetings, drinking way too much coffee just to function. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. My sister called twice a week, worried about how I sounded on the phone. That's when I decided to do some research about the house. I went to the Riverside Public Library and looked up property records, newspaper archives, anything that might explain what was happening to me. The librarian, an older woman named Dorothy, helped me navigate the microfiche machine. "You're in the old Hartley place," she said when I gave her the address. Her expression changed, became more guarded. "Haven't seen anyone ask about that property in years." The records showed that the house had a history. Built in 1963 by Robert and Margaret Hartley. They'd lived there for 15 years before Robert died in a car accident. Margaret stayed in the house alone for another 10 years, until 1988. That's where the records got strange. Margaret Hartley had simply vanished. No missing person report, no forwarding address, no death certificate. One day she was there, the next day she wasn't. The house sat empty for 6 months before the bank took possession and put it up for rent. Since then, the house had been rented dozens of times, but no one ever stayed longer than a few months. Always the same story. Tenants would break their lease suddenly and move out without explanation. I found one newspaper article from 1995 about a family who'd rented the house. They'd called the police multiple times, reporting strange disturbances and unexplained phenomena. The police reports were mostly redacted, but I could make out a few phrases. Recurring nightmares, feeling of being watched, female presence. That night, I decided to stay awake. I drank 3 energy drinks and positioned myself in a chair facing the bed, determined to prove to myself that the dreams were just dreams. I had my phone ready to record anything unusual. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the sudden cold. And then, my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely pick up the piece of paper. It was old, yellowed around the edges, and written in faded blue ink. The handwriting was neat, feminine. My name is Margaret Hartley. I lived in this house until 1988. I never left. Please help me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in that chair, staring at the note, trying to rationalize what had happened. But there was no rational explanation. I had witnessed something impossible, and I had physical proof of it. The next morning, I called Dorothy at the library and asked if she could help me find more information about Margaret Hartley. She agreed to meet me that afternoon, and when I showed her the note, her face went white. "Where did you get this?" she asked. I told her the truth, everything, the dreams, the research, what had happened the night before. Dorothy listened without interruption, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I knew Margaret," she finally said. "We went to high school together. She was a sweet girl, but after Robert died, she became different. Withdrawn, paranoid. She was convinced that someone was trying to force her out of her house." Dorothy pulled out a folder she'd brought with her. "I did some digging after you called. Margaret had been fighting an eviction notice for months before she disappeared. The bank wanted to foreclose on the property, but she refused to leave. She kept saying the house was all she had left of Robert. She showed me a copy of a police report from August 1988. A wellness check had been requested by neighbors who hadn't seen Margaret in over a week. When the police arrived, the house was empty. but there were signs that she'd been living there until very recently. Food still in the refrigerator, clothes in the closet, her purse and keys on the kitchen counter. The strange thing, Dorothy continued, was the basement. Margaret had covered every inch of the walls with newspaper clippings about the bank, about foreclosure laws, about tenant rights, and in the center of it all, she'd written the same phrase over and over again: "I will never leave this house." That evening, I went into the basement for the first time since moving in. I'd avoided it because it felt oppressive down there, but now I needed to see it for myself. I found the light switch and made my way down the creaky wooden stairs. The walls were still covered. Layers upon layers of yellowed newspaper clippings, all related to housing law and tenant rights. And there, in the center of the back wall, written in the same blue ink as the note, were the words, "I will never leave this house." Repeated hundreds of times, but that wasn't the most disturbing thing I found. In the corner of the basement, hidden behind an old water heater, I discovered a small area that had been converted into a makeshift living space. A sleeping bag, canned goods, bottles of water, and dozens of notebooks filled with Margaret's handwriting. I took one of the notebooks upstairs and read it by lamplight. The entries started normal enough. Daily observations, thoughts about missing Robert, complaints about the bank. But as the entries progressed, Margaret's mental state became increasingly fragile. She wrote about seeing people watching the house, about finding evidence that someone had been inside while she was out, about phone calls in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. The final entry was dated August 15th, 1988. "They're coming for me tonight. I can hear them outside, but I made a promise to Robert that I would never leave this house, and I intend to keep it. If they want me gone, they'll have to take me by force. I'll find a way to stay, even if it means staying forever." That night, Margaret appeared in my dreams again, but this time was different. She wasn't standing at the foot of the bed. She was sitting on the edge, and for the first time, she spoke. "They made me leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I found a way back. I kept my promise to Robert.